Welcome to the ProLife Team podcast. I'm here with Dr. Joe Malone, and we're going to talk about marriage and sexuality and ways to improve one's health by making healthy sexual decisions. So, Dr. Joe, I'm excited to have you on the ProLife Team podcast. Would you introduce yourself as if you were talking to a small group of pregnancy clinic leadership teams?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Yeah, again, last time I was on, and again, thanks for having me this time as well, Jacob. I shared that I'm new to this movement, but I've learned a lot in the last months, I guess I should say. And what I'd like to say is Pregnancy Center help folks, Pregnancy Help Center, I should say. I'm here to help you. And thank you guys. You help so many people, and it's such a um, day in and day out. You're putting your lives on the line. Hopefully, what God's given me is going to allow me to help you um, work with these young women and help them to prevent the need for abortions in the future. That's my hope and my prayer.
So, can you tell us what human sexual wellness is, and what are your thoughts and research? What's been the research on this topic? Like, what's it saying? What have you found?
Excellent. Yeah. Sexual wellness, again, that would if you just took it and defined it as it is. Wellness is generally the practicing a preventive lifestyle, and we all know what sexual means. So a lifestyle that is preventive as far as problems goes is what sexual wellness would mean. But in my research, as you asked, Jacob, what I found is that sexual wellness equals sexual integrity. So again, I came into this without really much bias at all. And what I found is that the science and then God's design match up and show that, again, sexual wellness really works out to being sexual integrity. And again, especially for females in our species, let's put it that way, because I've studied this on a species level. So it's different with different species, but for humans, definitely sexual wellness equals sexual integrity.
Um, and so speaking of sexual integrity, what does that look like when it comes to the different scenarios that people find themselves within, such as a dating couple, and variations of that, along with a monogamous marriage relationship, and also different variations of that.
All of the other variations besides a monogamous marriage are less than ideal. I got a good friend and colleague in Chicago that runs an initiative, and he's brought up to me that we have a abortion problem in this country, obviously, but even more than that, we have a marriage problem because 86% of abortions go to unwed mothers. So if we could do something about the 86% of young women, girls even, that are getting pregnant and out of circumstances that are not a married couple circumstance, we could go a long way to helping with the abortion situation. Again, that's what I want to be, as a scientific resource to the pregnancy care center staffs to help bring this knowledge, this information to the girls and young women that they're working with, and try to prevent things from happening, or at least maybe after maybe a situation has been dealt with, pregnancy's been dealt with, maybe from there that young woman can learn the science. And then again, it's backed up by the Bible, obviously. I mean, Genesis 3:16 says, your desire will be for your husband. And a lot of people pass over that. It's right at the beginning of the Bible, but God really created women with a strong desire to cleave to their husband and to have, well, first of all, have a husband, cleave to him. And again, I think there's a scientifically, what I've found out is that there's an instinct or an intelligence in women that pushes them along the way to having sexual integrity. It's just that this society is giving so many messages and pushing them so hard in the direction of promiscuity that a lot of them fall to that. So a lot of what I want to do today even is share some of the science on this, and again encourage pregnancy care center staffs to start speaking to these young women and girls about chastity till marriage. Again, no matter what their history has been, they can start practicing it from that point forward. Because again, the science is telling us, well, again, we've just now got this science. So human experience has told us this before this, and of course the Bible has been saying these things all the way along. But now we have the science that can help these young women to see that they're not doing themselves, or well, themselves especially, but any other women, any favors by being promiscuous before marriage. And I'll go into why that's true in a minute here, but I want to let you have another question if you like.
Sure. Um, so when it comes to secular school systems, how might this health information, scientifically backed, be used by elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools in a secular public school environment?
Well, again, there's been a lot of debate over, the young kids having any kind of sex ed. I would go along with that in a lot of ways. I think there's an age of innocence that they kind of need to be able to grow up through. But there comes a time, maybe middle school, high school, where they should start learning some of these things. And it should be, again, age appropriate and sensitive to what they're going through, because we definitely don't want to promote sexualization. We want to lower sexualization. I believe that a lot of the sex ed that's being done now, especially comprehensive sexuality education, is trying to promote sexualization of the students, and it's really destructive. And so what we're going to try to do is be constructive in the way of giving them tools where they can understand themselves, the young women, also understand the young men, and understand the differences between the two, and how they see things differently, and use that to their advantage. The other really important thing that they need to learn early, well, again, somewhere in the high school, middle school time period, and again, this is something that you can teach, any probably from middle school or up, is that boys and girls, men and women fall in love differently. And this is like a headliner here, because only in about the last 10 years have we discovered this. There's two different ways that males are benefited by romancing a woman rather than having casual sex with her. And it benefits the relationship as well. It benefits the chances of getting on the pathway to marriage. One way is that vasopressin, and again, this research as far as the way vasopressin works in the brain as far as male bonding is very, very recent. There's been other knowledge about vasopressin, how it acts throughout the rest of the body for a long time. But so vasopressin is, again, the major male bonding neurotransmitter and hormone. The only way that it gets a chance to bond, though, is if a young man and a young woman date, are around each other. It doesn't really matter what they do if they're sexually attracted to each other. The male's vasopressin is going to be building up in his brain. If they have sex, and if he comes to climax, what the chemicals at climax, which there's a huge amount of testosterone, dopamine goes down actually, serotonin, oxytocin, and especially opioids, which is the major reward chemical, they all really blast up. They all really explode, I guess you'd say. And that vasopressin gets washed out. But if he's just attracted to her, he's around her, they're dating. Again, old school. It's the old school approach. It's the old Judeo-Christian society, based on Judeo-Christian society, that had the rules as far as no premarital sex and that type of thing. It allowed the vasopressin to be in the young men's brains long enough for them to form receptors. And when receptors were formed eventually, after months and months and months of this courtship type of thing, then the vasopressin itself would go into the receptor and lock. And at that point, a young man falls in love, or bonds, however you want to put it. One other, again, headliner here for girls and young women is that besides that reason to not be sexually active before marriage, if you want to ever get married, is oxytocin. Women have lots of oxytocin and lots of estrogen, and they boost each other. So that's one of the reasons that the way that things have been going in our culture has been so bad for women is that they fall in love readily with sex. They fall in love readily with intercourse. So, but again, it keeps the male from falling in love with him and bonding with him. But if the male is held off like this, if they do the traditional romance and courtship and that type of thing, and save sex for marriage, then his oxytocin that rises whenever he's around her, and they hug and they kiss and that type of thing, it's going to continue. It's going to rise, and the testosterone again at orgasm, his testosterone explodes amongst the others that I named, and oxytocin gets driven down by testosterone. So as long as his testosterone is not going high, then the oxytocin has a chance to build its bonds as well. And when a man commits on any level, boyfriend, engagement, marriage, has children, especially when you have children, drops like 50%. Testosterone drops at all those stages. And so there's definitely, Jacob, a plan here in motion. There's a design. God has designed this and designed humans to be monogamous. There's just that we have, America and Western Europe has lost their ways in this situation. So getting back to the pregnancy centers, again, if we can start teaching girls and young women this scientific truth and give them a reason to practice chastity premaritally, we're going to help the situation tremendously, because we're going to be able to head off unwanted pregnancies before they even happen. So, but let me just share a little quick story. A young woman, two young women that I've dealt with in the past have told me that they're one father, one mother. In each case, their father and mothers were in divorced from the original mom and dad, and they were the ones that wanted out of the marriage. But they told their girls that the only way they were going to get a guy in this day and age was to sleep with him, have sex with him ahead of time. And we've got parents telling their daughters this. So again, a very destructive situation, let alone what the school is telling them. So, but that's something that I think that the pregnancy center staffs can really use, information that's going to, again, help them to get these girls and young women to realize, hey, someday I want to fall in love with somebody. Someday I want to get married. Someday I want to have children. And this is the old school, the biblical approach is the way to do it. And again, it's been proven scientifically in about the last 10 years. You won't hear that very many places because they're trying to tell a different story. They don't want that. They don't want that truth to come out. But that's the truth, and that's something I want to try to get out there to them.
So, to recap, it sounds like we have been designed to be romantic in order to form a love bond, to have that romance without climax for a long season. And then that long season gives our bodies time to biologically develop the love connection.
Exactly. You restated that extremely well. That's exactly the way it is. And then on the other end of it, the other end where these girls and young women have been pushed, again, a lot of it's by the feminists, the radical feminists that have tried to say, that girls and women are just the same as guys. I mean, they've got to act just like guys do. And they got, especially in the area of sexuality, they've got to be very aggressive and that type of thing. Well, hookup cultures come because of that. And really, I mean, the truth of it is that hookup culture, the way it is, enables and empowers rape culture. Again, you hear about rape culture on the campuses. And again, 80% of rapes or unwanted sexuality, sexual assault, all those different categories, 80% of it happens within the context of a hookup. So not only is there a positive to courtship and romance and holding off on sex until marriage, not only a positive in that direction of that you're actually probably going to end up getting married and you're going to have a happy couple and we're going to have a happy family eventually. You're going to, and you have enough of those, you're going to have a happy country. Not only on that end of it, but also on the other end, on the pushing promiscuity literally on campuses and wherever else they can. They are actually endangering our girls and young women. And so that is something that needs to be stood up against as well, and needs to be called out, because universities are really they're really bad in doing that, because it's not hidden. The research is there, and they should know better. But they continue this sexualization is the best way that I can put it. Even at that age, they're pushing sexuality. They're pushing um, basically contraception and abortion. If all the other things fail. So that's a kind of a double-edged sword there, that you win on each end of that if you practice chastity to marriage.
Sounds like you're sharing a scientific approach that supports chastity,
Mhm.
and it also seems to um uh it's a reason to not promote contraceptives being handed out in order to encourage premarital sex or sex outside of marriage,
Yes.
because that would essentially just line people up with, well, avoiding these love connections being made, as well as when contraceptives fail, then we're lining ourselves up for ending the life of a conceived child.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, I'm glad that I'm communicating this the way it is, because you're picking it up
Yeah.
exactly the way what I'm saying. And again, for a while here in my life, I've kind of held off on sharing this type of thing, because there's so many people out there that are will cancel you or whatever. They don't want to hear this. But again, especially our girls and young women, they need to hear it. And the guys are benefited by it as well, when they are kind of helped down that path, or forced down that pathway of chivalry, and treating the girls with respect, and romance, being romantic with them. They end up being benefited by it as well. While we're on hormonal birth control, yes, it's got a ton of negative effects to it, especially the younger the girl is, the 15 to 19-year-old stage. There's all kinds of suicide increases, and cutting, and depression and anxiety. But even the older ones, 20, in their 20s and that type of thing, bunch of bad effects there. Another big thing is that uh, hormonal birth control causes women and girls to be attracted to somebody that they wouldn't be attracted to normally. And oftentimes, and what that's about is that it changes their chemistry, so that they're attracted to people who are more like them genetically than they would be otherwise. And so
Hmm.
a lot of them, when they go off the pill, after they get married finally, um, they're not attracted to their husband anymore. That's a horrible place to be there. And it also dampens their sex drive. Their sex drive is dampened. They don't go through the normal cycle that women do. Uh, the kind of the ups and downs. Uh, Along with antidepressants, it really depresses the sex drive. And of course, if after they're married, and wanting to have a good sex life, all of that can be extremely negative. It also, again, this doesn't get any much press, but it also causes clots at a much higher rate, blood clots, and cancer is increased. So, Jacob, to tell you the truth, the old school way, you know, girls and boys, they grew up, and right around 20 to 25, but especially probably closer to 20, they got married and they started having children. Um, and then they had quite a few children, and she breastfed them. All of those things add up to a healthier life, much higher chance of a healthier life for the young woman than she would if she was doing what we're talking about now. Again, the birth control pills have a lot of negative effects behaviorally, um, as well as just flat out health wise. Let me just read you a couple of things here as far as what I was talking about with the behavior of the girls and young women, and how their early behavior affects their health later in life. So early sexual arousal on a young woman, or girl and young woman, influences her to be more sexual as she gets older. So the earlier the first sexual arousal, the more she's going to have a tendency to be higher sex driven than she would have been. early and promiscuous sexual activity raises her chances of developing vaginal and cervical cancer. We already talked about this, but use as a teenager or young adult of hormonal birth control really raises the chance of depression and committing suicide. None or a minimal number of pregnancies and none or minimal breastfeeding raises her chances for both ovarian and uterine cancer. And ovarian is usually fatal if they get that. Here's another one that has to do with the home, and I'll explain this a little bit. Beginning to menstruate early for a girl raises her chances of getting uterine cancer down the line. Now, we would think to ourselves, and it's really not her fault, if she starts her period earlier, and it isn't, but it can be the fault of the home because, and again, there's a couple other things, to be fair, I'll throw in here. Obesity is raising this because it's when a girl's body gets enough fat, it signals that start menstruating, and there was one other one. The things that are in the environment, the plastics that are in the environment also have a tendency to raise it. But here's the big one. A girl that's in an intact home with her mom and dad, and where that, especially that dad is around, her biological dad is around, they found that they start menstruating later. And the girls that don't have their dad in their home, or if they have like somebody else, a male in the home, or like a stepdad, they'll start their period early. So it's a destabilizing thing in their home. So again, we spoke of marriage earlier. Marriage solves most of these problems. a good marriage, and it's hard to even list how many benefits there are to being in a good marriage. Some other, if I get the opportunity and the honor to talk to you again on maybe another one of these, I'll go through marriage and all the benefits. But I'll add a couple other things if you don't mind too. So every way you look at this, girls lose, young women lose being sexually active. Casual sex. I always say casual sex is an oxymoron because there's no such thing as casual sex. I'll just give you this. After hooking up, the effects on women, 78% of women regretted it. Women are depressed at higher rates after hooking up. Women have lower self-esteem after hooking up, and they have higher general mental distress. So again, hooking up, needing to have birth control, being on birth control because you are hooking up, all of it adds up to a really, really unhealthy, an unwellness situation, probably some of the lowest sexual wellness that we could ever look for. But in addition to that, men have attitudes towards women and girls that are sexually active or practice casual sex, because women and girls need to know this, that after a sexual like after a couple that isn't married has sexual intercourse, a lot of the young men, especially the ones that are more of the player types and kind of probably the more popular ones, dating a lot of girls and that type of thing, within 10 seconds after climaxing, his valuation of her, and even how she looks to him, how attractive she is to him, goes down, even to the point of her not being attractive anymore. Now, for the young men that weren't players and that didn't go out with girls and women to try to just get in the bed with them, that wasn't true. But girls and women should know that these guys that they think are so they're so attractive and everything, and I'll never have a chance to get him if I don't have sex with him. They need to know that when you have sex with this guy, he's gonna devalue what you're worth to him. You're devaluing yourself in his eyes. The other thing they need to know, and again, this will come as a surprise, I think, to most people, is that men really value faithfulness in their married partners, and this is including the players I was just talking about. They're number one out of 130 traits in a woman that they want to get married to someday. They pick faithfulness as number one, and not being I guess you say cheap or whatever, or being sexually active. They value that number one for being for a future marriage partner. So out of 130 different traits, and then the ones that follow beneath that were honesty, the types of things that if a young woman or girl is practicing chastity and sexual restraint, he's going to see her that way. So again, it's been a little surprising to me scientifically because of the way our society is, but scientifically, and again, you can go to the Bible, you can go to a lot of other, faith, a lot of other religious resources, and they all say the same thing, and they're all correct. So, does that make sense?
It is amazing that you're showing the value of chastity through a biological lens. And it makes sense that when someone says, I don't want to have sex, while the culture is saying that if you have sex, you're going to hook them into marriage, and not having sex will align you with being a more desirable life partner because it's a value to have chastity and integrity, looking more long term than short term. I'm imagining how pregnancy clinic leadership teams are hearing this, and they will find ways to communicate this to young clients.
Yes.
I have a question for you. So, are there stats, or with your research, have you seen that women are taking the pill before they menstruate, or as soon as they start menstruating? Is that, what's the reality look like for young girls on the pill?
It looks like about the youngest age they start taking the pill is 15, and then, which they would mean that they'd be menstruating maybe a year or two before that. And of course,
Okay.
when they start menstruating, it's usually all over the board. It isn't regular. It takes quite a long time some of them to the near the end of their teenage years for it to become regular. That's why even back in the days, back in the ancient days, most of the time pregnancies didn't occur until right around 20 or so, where the first pregnancy in a marriage would take place, even though they may have gotten married earlier, which they did back in the day. Again, used to be 12 was the age of consent for a long time in Europe, and again back into the Middle Ages and that type of thing. So yeah, so it's about 15 years old, and again, those 15 and 19-year-olds, they really, really suffer from the hormone exposure. And it's bad on the oral, the pill contraceptives, but it's even worse with things like IUDs or patch or whatever, where they have those big dosages of it. I mean, the stats, I don't have them in front of me, but it's scary how much depression and anxiety that brings on, and then also completed suicides. I mean, that's one of the most tragic things I can think of, is a girl or young woman, ended up killing themselves as a result of, the way they feel and that type of thing, because they want to be sexually active and that type of thing.
And then when you mentioned that a woman who's on the pill, who she's attracted to changes, maybe to match someone closer to her own makeup, when it comes to compared to that of not being on the pill. And so if she ends up getting married while on the pill, she may find that her attraction dissipates after getting off the pill. Um, I'm thinking that it might be really helpful for you to maybe provide a scientific journal link or something that we can include in the notes of
Mhm.
this podcast, so that way people can refer to that study. But I feel like that's a message that needs to be delivered to these 15-plus-year-old women who are starting or thinking about the pill, so that they can understand, it's essentially it's going to mess with their ability to find out who they're attracted to, and it's going to result in some problems after they get off the pill. And that's, yeah, such an important message to hear. And I did not know that until you mentioned it in this podcast.
Yeah, well, it's just now really becoming known. I mean, it's been known, by the medical folks and the scientists probably for 5 or 6 years, and maybe a little more than that. But it takes a long time, especially for news like that goes against the favored narrative to get out into the mainstream, you might say. And again, most women don't realize that, you know, waiting until they're in their 30s to get married and then trying to have children, you know, after that, they don't realize all of the negativity that brings on as well. So again, chromosomal damages to their children, the odds go way up on that. And again, I alluded to the kind of the old school, not even that old though, because back in the early 60s, basically, people were getting married young. And you know, just give you a few stats on that. There are 3 times more 20 to 29-year-olds married in the early 1960s than there are now. 3 times. In the early 1960s, 75% of 18 years old and older were married. So again, 3/4. And then again, going back to the abortion challenge we have, you know, in the early 60s, only 5% of babies were born out of wedlock. And you want to guess how much it is now overall, the average, Jacob?
Well, I know it's higher, but
Yeah, a lot to it.
is it half?
Say that one more time.
Is it half?
Actually, as far as being born out of wedlock, there was about 5% being born out of wedlock in the early 60s. As of 2010, there's 40% being born out of wedlock. I'm sure it's higher now in 2022. So we went from 5% in the early 60s. Again, when we had these guardrails on that we're talking about as far as societal stigma, if you're sexually active before marriage and that type of thing, we had 5% then overall, the total society, and now we have 40%. So it's increased. Well, again, that's 2010 statistics.
So 50 years.
Yeah, it increased by 8 times.
Yeah, and with another 12 years, based on that trend, it's probably 50 or more at this point, but it's probably in that ballpark.
Yeah, exactly. And again, we've had a lot of you know, young people these days they're not getting married, you know, they're cohabiting. There's just all these different variations that are going away from again, that tradition of, okay, you get to a certain point, you know, maybe you're a high school graduate, if you're not going to go on to college, you know, you're in love with somebody, you're not afraid to get married at 20 or so, 20, 21, or, you know, 22, 23, whatever. And again, while you're young, the female's peak fertility is age 19 to 29, and the male's is 24 to 26. So you're right there in the fertility peak. So there's just a lot of positives to following that time-honored and biblical, you know, again, to keep from committing fornication. Sometimes it's not a good idea to let the time lapse too long that you're an adult, basically. You have all these hormones and you don't have anybody telling you can't do it, except, you know, people like us and the Christian church. And so it makes it pretty difficult. But if we can start getting the perception of marriage is okay a little younger, I think that would help things a lot as well. Let me throw couple more things in just especially for the women that are listening on this idea of casual sex, giving men casual sex, because again, they did some research on men's regrets versus women's regrets, and I just had to shake my head when I went through this study. But women's regrets were things like losing their virginity to the wrong person, or you know, having sex when they were drunk and that person was really a creep when they got sober, and they were interested in the hookup turning into a relationship. So, and hardly ever did it do that. Very, very seldom. That was women's regrets after a hookup. Men's regrets, they regretted that they missed probably some other sexual opportunities. They regretted that they didn't have more sex when they were younger. And again, this isn't all men, but this was more men said these things than women did, and vice versa. And finally, failing to capitalize on opportunities that they had to hook up in the past. So again, it's like women, if they can just catch on to this, they really are in control. They've got the superpower. And if they decide as a whole, or most of them decide to change this, the way things are in the society, it will change, and it will go back to what we were talking about in the 60s. And again, people always say, you can't go back, they always make that statement. But actually, I used to teach history, and history is not linear. It's actually cyclical. It goes back and forth. Again, if we have a strong enough motivation to do it, we can take things back in the direction that they were 50, 60 years ago. Okay, done with my preaching there. Go ahead. What other questions? What other questions?
Sure. So the other items on the list was to talk about the scientific basis of human sexual integrity in marriage, but I think we've covered that somewhat. Is there anything more you'd like to say on that topic, or the male sexual system or the female sexual system?
The only thing I'd like to say in addition on the marriage and sexual integrity is I want to reiterate for the folks that are listening, and especially the pregnancy care center folks,
Yeah.
and especially for the ladies that are pregnancy care folks. It really is. You all have probably felt, earlier, depending on how old you are, you felt pressure to be maybe promiscuous and that type of thing as a young woman, and probably a lot of you resisted it, some of you didn't, but it actually is put there by God for our good. And again, females, not only in our species, but in many other species, they're the ones that are the gatekeepers for sexuality. And in most other species where we don't have social pressures like we have in this society, they put a lot of pressure on the males to produce, they produce resources for them, to bond with them and them only. It's a female driven situation. If we could get our young women and girls to understand this, that they're really victims these days with the hookup culture and being pushed into casual sex, that they have all the power in their hands if they just turn it around and start kind of living the old school way. Again, their lives would be so much better, and so would the guys, because the guys are benefited by it, because that leads you down the pathway to marriage. And there's so many benefits in marriage to both, but especially the guys. I mean, for one thing, the females have a 50% greater chance of death from all causes if they're not married. Males have a 250% chance of death by all causes if they're not married. So being married really, really helps boys and young men to just mature. And again, it's God's design to make men out of boys, especially, and take them off the streets, take them out of the things that they harm themselves and harm each other. It's so wise. And our species, again, our bodies show that we're monogamous. And you can look at other species. I won't go into it here today, maybe for another time, but how promiscuous species have different bodies and monogamous species have distinctive bodies from men. I mean, the evidence is all here that we are supposed to live like the Bible describes and like the science is describing now. It's just a matter of getting the message out there to, again, especially the girls and young women, because they are the decision makers. They're the gatekeepers. So, and they're also, by instinct and intelligence, most of them, there's a small percentage that's an exception to this, but 85-90% of them they have that tendency, they have that inclination to want to practice chastity till marriage, and then get married to a great guy and have a great family and live happily ever after. So we just got to help them down, get on that pathway and help them have the courage, to do it. We need to be encouraging them in this way. And again, what I can provide is the science that will back these staffs on these at these pregnancy care centers, so they can argue from a scientifically proven point, rather than just having to I don't mean just, because the ethical argument is important too, and the biblical argument is extremely important, but being able to put in the science as well, I think really strengthens it. It did in my life, as far as it strengthened my faith to know this. hopefully it will theirs too.
When things are true, it's just amazing to see how biologically it can be shown and be demonstrated to align with the truth. And
Yes.
so that just seems that it's amazing. So and it seems like the instructors of children would include uh a single mom, a single dad, two parents, or their teachers at their school. And I feel like those are probably the biggest instructors of children normally. When do you think the values of marriage and romance should be taught by a parent or a teacher?
Well, I think you can, despite what I said earlier, I think you can teach the little ones, romance, your mom and dad. In an ideal world, the teachers, the teaching staff would all be united on, because they know how much value there is to a good marriage, to every kind of wellness outcome you could think of for the kids. They would be united on teaching even the young children things that promoted marriage, especially man and woman and their biological children. They would be telling stories, and like they used to. I mean, when I was a child, they would read the Little House on the Prairie books, to us, and other books like that, and that promoted the idea of family, and promoted, our ancestors' struggle to be able to survive in a lot of cases. They don't do that anymore, from what I can see, and I think again, there's so much improvement that can be made there, but certainly by middle to high school, I think you can start having some conversations, especially in high school, about the value of marriage to these young people in comparison to other things in their life going forward. And again, um, I'm thinking back because in college, I'm far enough back that we actually literally had marriage prep class. I took marriage prep class in college. And again, that would be great to reinstitute that, but the colleges and universities are quite the opposite message these days. But high school, yeah, promoting marriage, but getting them and the college students to realize that marriage is so valuable. It's the college students, and I always wondered at how hard they worked to get their bachelor's degree. And they're working a job, they had their social life, they worked really hard, to pass their classes and everything. They did all that and paid a bunch of money to get something that's going to help get a good job, and hopefully that they did get a good job from it. But there was very little or no thought put into marriage and thinking about how can I get on a pathway to where I'm going to meet somebody that's going to be great, and they're going to think I'm great, and we're going to get married and we're going to form a family. The importance of that to your well-being and your success in life, I say, is more important than the bachelor's degree or even a master's or even a PhD. Your marriage, next to your decision about God or not, to believe in God, believe in Jesus, and believe that He died for us, and trust in Him to save us from our sins. Other than that, your marriage is decision number two, I think, in importance. So it's very, very, if any preparation is given at all, if any education is given at all, it's very, very passing and very, very light. I think it should be emphasized greatly because, again, a good marriage, and again, especially if there's not too much of a lag time between when a boy and a girl become, sexually mature, and I mean fully, like 18, 19, there's not too much of a lag time between there and like 10 years or so, a lag time. It's going to be much easier to live that chaste life from the time, they get out of high school and that type of thing to the marriage, like it used to be 2 or 3 years, than it is now, where you're trying to make it to near 30 before you get married. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And I feel like the amount of energy and just planning and work to pour into something that's so important needs to be promoted and needs to be encouraged, and because it's going to essentially help our society be built on stronger families.
Yes.
So what do you think of when someone teaches less desired or less healthy relationships, like two moms or two dads or more than two people, like three plus people, compared to the ideal situation of a healthy marriage with one faithful man and one faithful woman. Should it be taught that these other relationships that exist um, are less healthy than one man and one woman? Should we be sharing that story? But and what do you think about when they're all raised to the same level, and they're one's not put below another? And what kind of harm does that create for people who are now being confused about which is the best because they're being treated as equals based on some of the new when it comes to the new equality and outcomes that's being taught in schools, all situations are now trying to be equal in outcome. And in reality, a healthy marriage based on your data seems to be superior to these alternative relationships that someone could find themselves in.
Well, again, I probably do have a bias on this one. And again, biblically, I think it's pretty clear that the superior choice by far is one man and one woman. And again, the science, I think, will back you up on that. Although I haven't dug into that as deeply as some of these other subjects, but and I haven't dug into the benefits or not benefits of the same-sex thing either. But again, as much. But I've been around them enough to tell you that yes, I think it's clear that heterosexual marriage that stays together, that children are born into, and again, my bias would be that it starts earlier, and they have more than they have a fair number of kids. The kids get breastfed. Everybody's going to be healthier, including the mother. That type of thing. So I look at things a lot of times from the health and wellness perspective. That's clear that that's the case. The others, again, I just keep going back to the 1 in 10,000, the 1 in 30,000 as far as transgenderism, the prevalence of it, and then everything else, LGBTQ and plus whatever else. It's 3% of the population that is dealing with those issues, and so the 97% of the population is what I keep my eye on, and what I'm really trying to promote. This healthy marriage, and that sexual wellness is equals sexual integrity, which is really marriage. We want to get sex inside marriage, and so I really focusing on that. And the other issues, I'm observing them, and again, like I said, I've got my scientific knowledge of it, and also my background as far as the way I was raised and that type of thing in the church. So I feel that there's a better pathway and a not so good pathway. I don't judge those folks as far as I wouldn't consider myself an enemy with any of them. I don't wish them ill will at all. But as a scientist, as a hopefully a leader, a thought leader amongst the folks we're talking about here, I would have to say yes, that the ideal is a one man, one woman, and a fairly large family, and again, church attendance and community involvement. The benefit of just to give you one example, the benefit of a good marriage with a man and a woman, especially a long term, it's beneficial on so many levels. I'll just tell you the one I think is very interesting. They did a study with these couples, and some of them were, they were living together, and some of them were, in unhappy, predominantly relationships, and some of them were in happy marriages. What they found was that the ones that were in a happy marriage, at night, literally, they strapped them to blood pressure. They had blood pressure, checking devices on them that they could still, I guess, sleep with. But what they found with the others that weren't in a married situation, man and woman married, none of them had this effect that the married couples did when they're sleeping at night. And that effect was both of their blood pressure dropped. Their blood pressures dropped tremendously compared to the other ones that weren't in a committed relationship, or not in a good getting along well together and that type of thing. So um, a great marriage is on so many levels. A great marriage, your traditional man and woman, is positive on so many levels, and not only to the couple themselves, but again, some of the research I have done more on is the children. How it affects the children. And I mentioned one thing earlier about a daughter. How she's affected by either having her biological dad, especially a loving biological dad in the home. It really makes her thrive in general, and really is helpful to girls because as they grow up, because their father is really the first role model for a male for them to apply to other, the boys that they start having attractions to, and then eventually their husbands. So without that situation, in the home, there's a lot of, I think, there's a deficit there that's hard to replace otherwise. And it's there, some of it at least is pheromonal. So his familiar pheromones, his chemistry is like hers, and there's a comfort there. And again, it lowers the stress level on her body to the point where she doesn't start menstruating earlier, like I said, if there's a different situation. So does that make sense?
Yes, and yes, I think we've covered a lot of good material, and I am really glad that you highlighted some of these concepts that I was not aware of, and I just know that our audience is going to really treasure and try and figure out how to communicate some of these valuable ideas to women who are coming in different scenarios, and also I hope and pray that people working with our schools and parents will be able to convey these ideas as preventive content, preventive education, and preventive measures to avoid hardships. Thank you so much, Dr. Joe, for being on the podcast.
Oh,
Any last thoughts or yeah?
yeah. Thank you, Jacob. The honor really is all mine. I appreciate the opportunity to be on here, and I appreciate your thoughtful questions and just this conversation that we can have. Yeah, prevention. Yeah, that is really, again, what I'm hoping to be able to do, and with these in combination, in collaboration with these pregnancy care center staffs. And again, I want to be a scientific resource for them, and I really want us to hammer that message of, especially to the girls and young women, that really you've got the superpower. You've got the superpower through chastity, and through designing your life the way you want it to be, to never have to face a situation of an abortion, or a lot of other STIs. I didn't even get to the STIs, STDs, but all of that disappears too, when you practice this lifestyle. Just real quick, a woman has a 8 times higher chance of getting HIV if there's HIV, between the couple than the guy does, and of course that's hugely serious. And they have a 4 times greater chance of getting gonorrhea because their anatomy is conducive to that, because it's easier to penetrate than the male genitalia is with the viruses, and also it's moist and warm and that type of thing, which lends itself to infections and that type of thing. So that's just one more thing to add on to these girls and young women, and any women that are listening, especially, or men, but especially women, older women that are listening to this. Our girls and young women deserve to be protected from this. And if anybody's listening to me, if this resonates with you, rings a bell in your heart, as far as we got to get this message to these young females, and we got to protect them, because right now they're just being torn apart, in the society, with the ways that society is expecting them to behave. And again, they end up last resort, if they're pregnant, they end up in our care, and that's a wonderful situation that we're here to care for them. But a whole lot of heartache and heartbreak can be avoided, and stress, if we can get to them earlier, get to them upstream, from the abortion situation. And again, start really pounding pounding a drum for marriage and how all the great things about marriage and how getting prepared for it is more important than their college education and that type of thing. And it's a good thing. Don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid if it's, if you're in love with somebody, to think you have to wait till you're 30 years old, because again, I think we set a lot of young people up for failure in this chastity situation by suggesting to them that, oh, you can't get married until you're 27 or 28, just wouldn't be the right thing to do. Well, they got to go all the way from 17, 18, when the hormones hit in the guys at least, their highest level. And we're putting a pretty high task on them. You and I both know, and the people who are listening know, that it's the most difficult time in history so far to practice chastity, but it can be done. And I think if a movement can be started, it can catch fire and grow, because it's in them to do this. It's in their hearts, it's in their intelligence, it's in their instinct. And the guys will respond to it, and again, it's in them to practice chivalry and romance and respect for the women. It's just so much better. Everybody wins on that.
And then I've got one last question. This one comes from our last podcast, which
Sure.
is, so let's say there's a man and a woman in a marriage, and for some reason their bond is not strong. It's a weak bond.
Mhm.
From your research, how can they grow that bond while in their current marriage? Does that essentially mean that they need to have romance for 3 months and without releasing from climax, or what's that look like for someone to recover from while being in a difficult marriage?
I don't think it would be a bad idea to be apart from each other. And now, I don't mean literally apart, like different houses or that type of thing. They can be in the same house, but I think it would be actually a good idea for them to go celibate for a while. And again, especially for the man to romance the woman, and look at their schedules, because a lot of times these days, um, you know, husband and wife are so busy with so many other different things that the load just of the internet, the internet puts on us with the emails and everything that we have to keep up with. There's just so many things that can get us bogged down, that we forget that life is really lived face to face, and you need much or most of your time to be face to face, and especially with the love of your life, your spouse, the person you're going to be with, hopefully the rest of your life. So that's one thing I would recommend is maybe taking a little vacation from the intimacy department, but work back towards real intimacy. Again, making it a situation where it isn't just, oh, we didn't have sex, so we better have sex, but we got to do this, right afterwards, and that type of thing. What I've found is that a lot of couples, just over time, the rest of their lives take their life with each other away from them, because they can always put that off. And you know so yes, I think a romantic vacation would, especially on the guy's side of it, would build up that more that vasopressin and oxytocin again, and romance her and date her. And again, on the other side of it, the woman feels so special when she's treated like that as well. So yeah, that's actually a good idea on your part. And again, won't solve all of them, but I bet you it would solve a high percentage of them, because the research on that is that most couples that end up getting divorced were not really in a bad state of disagreement. They weren't really at each other's throats until the divorce actually happened. So once the divorce is in process and their attorneys are going back and forth, that's when it really gets, the point of no return. So, and again, there's a high percentage, I can't bring back the exact percentage of couples that, are unhappy, but if they're kind of encouraged to stay together, like it's like within a year, if they stay together, a high percentage of, I think 70% of them end up not getting divorced if they just are encouraged to stay together and maybe practice some of the behavior that you're talking about with each other, actually paying attention to each other, and setting aside time, for each other in their schedules.
Yes, so a weekly date night along with a season of romance without sex sounds like a good recipe for recovery
Yeah,
or building.
just in general
Oh,
in our society, I don't think we can go wrong with having as much more romance in general as we can, because we're pretty low on it, even with married couples, but especially the youngsters coming up. But yeah, more romance is going to help, I think, on every level.
There is a temple being built, a sanctuary in quiet darkness, built with stones alive, with offerings of thanks and rest. There is a kingdom on a hill, a place of love and homegrown harvest, filled with living bricks to drive away all hopelessness. We are living stones, wrought with love and care, refined in healing fire. And you are the cornerstone, base of truth and hope, to build our lives upon. There is a church that is alive, refreshing home for heart and soul, filled with living wood, and by the builder each piece is known. We are known, we are known, we are and you